Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning here from Wollongong. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining our webinar on Essentials of Agile User Story Mapping. I'm Jasmine, and I am the Product Marketing Manager here at Easy Agile, and we're really excited to have you join us. We will wait 1 or 2 more minutes just for people to join the call, and then we'll get started, and I'll introduce you to Nick Muldoon, our co-CEO and co-founder here at Easy Agile. So as we're waiting to get started as well, just to point out that through this platform, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat through the chat box. So please feel free throughout the session to pop your questions in there. We will have time at the end where Nick will be able to answer those questions for you. So please feel free to add them. We'll also be running a couple of questions in there just to see who we've got on the call and your experience and familiarity with user story mapping. So just keep an eye on that window to the right of your screen there. Livestorm's preferred browser is Google Chrome as well, so it's best to open us up on there if you haven't already. It may be the cause for some technical issues if not, but if you've joined us now, hopefully that means that there aren't any issues. My colleague Sean Blake has asked a couple questions and given some tips in the chat box as well. He's head of marketing here at Easy Agile, so you'll see him pop up too. I think we might get started. So as I said, we are here to talk about the essentials of Agile user story mapping. And here at Easy Agile, our mission is to make Agile easy. And user story mapping is a key Agile process to making that happen. And I'd like to introduce Nick Muldoon, who, as I mentioned, is our co-CEO and co-founder here at Easy Agile. Nick has a wealth of experience in leading Agile teams and working on Agile products across Atlassian, Twitter, and now at Easy Agile. And I'll let Nick introduce himself a little bit further and tell you and share his expertise on user story mapping. Over to you, Nick.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jasmine. G'day, folks. I'm Nick Muldoon here. And today, as Jasmine mentioned, we're going to spend a bit of time looking at the essentials of Agile user story mapping. So I just wanted to set the scene and give you a bit of context first. My journey as a product manager began at Atlassian a little over 10 years ago now. I actually joined Atlassian in 2007, worked there for a number of years, and I was a product manager that did the Greenhopper acquisition and took it into Jira Agile. I relocated to San Francisco, worked with Twitter for a couple of years in San Francisco. I was really coaching there the leadership team and helping them focus on lean principles and being more effective. There was also like team level practices, and some of the stuff that I did at Twitter was really more story mapping sessions with product leads to help bring together groups from across the company to focus on a particular customer. At Twitter, I also participated in the Agile Industry Consortium. This was a group across the US that was basically 4,500, 5,000 employees and above companies that were doing Agile at scale. It was early days for the Scaled Agile framework, and Dean was proselytizing the Scaled Agile framework. And this was a group that was only available to people that were essentially internal coaches. And it was pretty interesting. It was a lot of times a shoulder to cry on when we were having difficult conversations at our various companies. And in returning to Australia with a young American daughter in 2015, we selected this area here, Wollongong. I've got this view from the sea to the escarpment and all the way north to the national park. It's cloudy and it's mist today. It's not the beautiful sunny day that we were hoping, but anyway, we've been here for 5 years now, coming up in December, actually. It's our 5th birthday as a company. And as Jasmine mentioned, I'm the co-CEO and co-founder here. And I guess the ethos behind Easy Agile is making it easy. Like, I know from my experience at Atlassian, working with thousands of companies across the globe, and again at Twitter trying to scale an Agile transformation, it's not actually easy. It's pretty challenging. Like many good things, it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of effort and perseverance on your part. And so we're trying to smooth that process and help teams get the benefits of Agile transformations a little bit easier and make it available to everyone on the team. So that's kind of the bit of the ethos behind us. So to give you a sense of who we are, this is actually a photo of our old offices pre-COVID. We've grown the team a little bit during the past couple of months. We've been doing remote hiring and remote onboarding, which is a bit of a different thing. Dave, my co-founder, who you'll see at the back holding out the tub of butter for me to have with my croissant there, he also worked at Atlassian. He was on Jira as an engineer, and he also moved with his wife to San Francisco before having an American daughter. So we're both like Aussies that went to America, started our families over there, and returned to Australia to be closer to the extended family. Today, the team's 20 folks, and we're supporting over 1,600 customers, mainly in Western Europe, North America. We don't have many customers here in this regional area of New South Wales in Australia. Some of the names you might be familiar with. These are companies that we help in small and in large part. There are some companies that are doing scaled agile transformations. There are some companies that are just using team level agile, and so the story maps and the roadmaps at a team level. And we see all sorts of different levels of maturity within different groups. And so I hope to be able to share some of that perspective today. So let's dive in. We're going to look at what is a user story map? Why do we actually create user story maps? What are the key elements of a user story map? Who to involve in a story mapping session? And so this is a pretty big piece to make sure that you have an effective session, and like how do we run effective story mapping sessions? So first up, what is a user story map? So when I took on this role of product manager for Greenhopper, this was an acquisition that Atlassian made in 2009, in early 2009. And at the time, Greenhopper was an extension to Jira that basically gave you a backlog that allowed you to order stories, tasks, bugs, whatever. And so my formative days as a product manager for Greenhopper, the first 6 or so months was really just familiarizing myself with a flat backlog. And potentially many of you have had experience with a flat backlog before. I guess the idea behind this is that you order it by customer value. You've got the highest customer value stuff at the top. Maybe you're doing some estimation depending on the maturity of your team to kind of figure out what's the risk, or the effort versus payoff for each of these stories. And that's how you order your backlog. A user story map is basically taking a different approach. And so one of my first events that I went to as a product manager for Greenhopper, which became Jira Agile and now Jira Software, one of the first events I went to was Agile 2009. And this was in Chicago, and I went to a session with Jeff Patton. It was a workshop, and he's the person that's written broadly about the practice of story mapping for well over a decade now. And it was coming back from that event, and in early 2010, when I actually ran the first story mapping session at Atlassian, and it was for the Greenhopper team, and it was fleshing out what were each of the key steps that a customer would go through on their journey, and what do we have to build to support that step. And the reason we were actually running that story mapping session was we'd embarked on, or decided, and it had embarked on a complete rewrite of Greenhopper to turn it into Jira Agile, which would then be the underpinnings for Jira Software that you see today. And so that was a little bit about my introduction. So to give you a bit more detail, like it's this visual representation of the customer journey. Typically, this happens in chronological order. Like, what is the first thing that the customer hits when they use the product, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And on a story map, you'll split this by various personas. So if I come back to Jira Agile, we had a number of different personas. We had the team member themselves, we had the Scrum Master, and we had the product owner. And each of those personas were interested in potentially different aspects of the Jira Agile product. And so we would have a different story map for each of those personas. So really the idea behind this was a way to bring empathy within the team and give them a vision for what it was that we were trying to deliver for the customer. So who is the customer? What is the problem that they're trying to solve? What's the journey that they go on? And ultimately, what value do we provide for them? So just to give you a few examples, typically, historically, these story mapping sessions take place on a whiteboard. They take place on butcher's paper on the wall or on the floor. Indeed, the first ones that I ran at Atlassian back in the day were on a whiteboard. And of the story mapping sessions that I ran at Twitter, they were all on a whiteboard with post-it notes. And one of the key differences actually between the story mapping sessions that I ran at Atlassian was we always had co-located teams at Atlassian. And that's not necessarily the case today, but back in the day, 8-10 years ago, we always had co-located teams at Atlassian. Whereas at Twitter, we always had distributed teams. So for a co-located team, it was a lot easier to get up and go on butcher's paper. And then looking at the experience at Twitter, when we had people that were distributed and we had onesie twosies that were dialing in via video conferencing, and we had to have someone, we had to have a local scribe who was chatting to someone to get what they wanted and put it on the wall. And there was a ton of friction, essentially. And so the idea behind Easy Agile was to take some of these activities that we were doing at Twitter, that we were doing at Atlassian, and that I knew a host of companies around the world were doing, but they were doing it physically, and bring those off the wall into a digital solution. And that was actually backed up by, this is a bit of a sidebar, I guess, but it was backed up by the trend that we saw in the version 1 State of Agile survey. Over the past 10 years, it showed that there was obviously a trend away from physical co-located teams to distributed teams and remote team members. And obviously we've seen that writ large in the year of COVID. So if you're thinking about how this kind of relates back to a digital solution, in Jira, you've got the Epic in Jira, which Jira software provides, and that kind of forms the backbone of the story map. They're those high-level user activities that a user is going to flow through as they engage with your product, engage with your solution. Each of those epics are then broken down into stories, tasks, or bugs. And obviously you can link those stories, tasks, or bugs in Jira using the epic link functionality. And then finally, you're taking this story map and you're slicing it and you're sequencing the work into sprints or versions, depending on whether you're a Scrum or a Kanban team. And we'll get into this a bit more detail, but essentially that slicing is based on, the team's velocity. How much do we think will get done in a sprint or a version? You might be doing estimation to assist the team with that, depending on their maturity. And it's a great way to kind of get a sense of what's going on and what we plan to deliver to our customers at a given point in time in the future. So to bring it all the way back to Jira, here's an example of Jira software. So this is the backlog that we created. There was something similar to this in Greenhopper. It came in Jira Agile, and today, obviously, it's Jira software. I'm sure folks are fairly familiar with that. A story map is taking that same data in Jira and it's providing a different visualization for it. And so you can see across the top, we're looking at a fictitious team here, teams in space, but we can see across the top these different activities or areas that a particular customer might engage with when they're looking at this product or when they're using this product. And then in this example here, you can see the user stories under each of those epics, and then sequenced into sprints, sprint 1, sprint 2 here. There's a whole lot more to this, and I encourage you to have a look at the demonstration video of Easy Agile User Story Maps for Jira by our product manager, head of product here, Tegan Harbridge, if you're interested in diving deep into that. So why do we create story maps? Incidentally, that's Tegan there with Angad. This is so Tegan does a demo, has a walkthrough demo of Easy Agile User Story Maps if you want to get deep into that. So why do we create story maps? Come back to where Jeff Patton started this, and the whole idea is that historically, product managers were creating this backlog, this flat backlog, and they were kind of creating that in a vacuum. And they'd create the roadmap in a vacuum, and they'd be doing this in advance of the team. And so they'd start to flesh out sprints and get them ready and do some pre-planning, and then the team would come in and they'd do their backlog grooming session together and their sprint planning together. But really, it was always at a chunked level. And so one of my colleagues on the Greenhopper team, when we were doing our first story mapping session in 2010, Alex Henneke at Atlassian, he said, "I can't see the forest for the trees." And that's how he described that flat backlog. He just said, "I can't see the forest for the trees. All we've got was this laundry list of stories, tasks, and bugs." And he was going like, what is the overarching value of this? And so you come back to this idea of an agile user story map. This story map is a technique to bring the whole team together and help them collaborate, or give them an opportunity to collaborate and flesh out and build this backlog together. And so you're building this shared understanding amongst the team members. And I guess one of the important things to say about this is actually it doesn't necessarily, like, you don't necessarily limit this to the team, and we'll touch on that in a bit more detail later, but really it's about this shared understanding. How do we get everyone in the team feeling like they are bought in and supportive of the vision for the product, and give them an opportunity to contribute? And if I think about that with respect to our experience at Easy Agile, we have, so every team member here at Easy Agile, they're on support. And so if you think about Tegan or Elizabeth, our product managers here at Easy Agile, they can do customer interviews, and they probably do 3 or 4 customer interviews a week. But then we might have another 20 customers that come through support, and every other team member here gets an experience and builds empathy with customers via responding to support requests. So why wouldn't we take all of the wisdom of that crowd of people and bring them together to create the story map and flesh out the backlog for what we're hoping to achieve for our customers? So, who are our customers? What are the problems that they face? What are the problems they face with our solution as it stands today? And really, we're hoping to get this alignment amongst the team around who our customers are, what they need. This shared understanding can't be emphasized enough, that kind of underpinned the whole ethos that Jeff Patton put forward with respect to story mapping. And obviously there's other outcomes that we want to get as well. Like, we want to have an artifact that kind of is alive and lives on and evolves over time as we learn more from our customers, but can help the team plan and adapt what they're going to deliver over the coming 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever that happens to be. So if I think about the benefits to the team with respect to customers, I think about an example of one of my colleagues at Twitter, John Walpole. And John was working with a team in our infrastructure operations group. And so this was a group of 45 odd teams, a couple of hundred people, and they did everything from building data centers, designing computer hardware, network engineering, everything. But the way that they were thinking about things was very much with respect to, I need to build a new computer that has a power efficiency requirement of blah, blah, blah. And John was using story mapping as a practice to get them to go beyond that and go, hang on, why do we want to get a more efficient power supply unit? Or, oh, well, it's because our finance team, who's our customer, they're asking us to be mindful of our costs and figure out our costs. And so John Walpole, who was one of the technical program managers at Twitter, he used this technique of story mapping really effectively to get the teams to go from, this is just like technology, hardware, network engineering that we need to deliver stuff, tactical things, to lift their sights up and go, hang on, who's our customer internally with respect to infrastructure operations, but who's our customer and what are we in service of? What's the greater objective or outcome that our customer is hoping to achieve? And so how do you lift your team's sights to get them to think about their customer? And obviously that's bringing that customer journey to life. So I think that is a key component of why the story map is so tremendously valuable. If we think about the various elements of a story map, we touched on this briefly before, but we'll go into a bit more detail now. So this bit across the top, we talked about these being the epics in Jira software. this is the backbone, and these is the, you know, those key customer activities. And I've got this simple example here of buying and watching a movie on an Apple TV, because I got one for the family at home, right? Like, we go through, we do the selection. So our key activity is selecting the movie, and there's a whole host of stuff with respect to selection. You know, so I'm going to break that down into many component pieces or user stories. Then there's the purchasing. Again, like, once I've made a selection, I want to purchase. Am I renting it? Am I buying it? How am I buying it? Am I buying it with a gift card? So there's a number of different components to that purchase activity. Then there's obviously watching. If I'm renting, I've got 48 hours. I've got to, from when I start it to when I finish it. If I buy it, I can open it and watch it whenever. And then there's social, like, how do I share this with my friends, for instance? So there's a number of key activities that Apple is trying to support here with a, you know, if they're going to do a story mapping session for the Apple TV. Now, you don't need to, as a customer or as a user, you don't necessarily need to complete all of these activities. But typically what we see is that these key activities are ordered chronologically. Like, how is a user going to interact with them? You know, I don't go and watch the movie before I've purchased it or selected it. And so our story map starts, you know, the first thing on that story map from the top left is like, how do I, what is, you know, what is that first activity that we need to do? And then we go on and go through that flow. And obviously, like, on a story map, as this session is run physically, or digitally, it doesn't matter. But as this session is run, you don't always come up with the exact things on the first go. And so, you know, the team should feel free and should feel empowered to, like, add new activities as they come to their forefront of their mind, and, like, split them apart, put a new activity in, and reshuffle things as they learn, obviously, from their customers. It's not like a set and forget. It's very much a fluid and dynamic thing that will evolve as the team continues to learn. So we take each of these activities and then we flesh them out. And so, like, we've got the backbone and we're fleshing out each of these activities with user stories. So if we go back to that example of selection, you know, I might want to do a free text search. I do a browse by genre. If I look at my Apple TV in movies today, or like late last month, and it had the Halloween special. So, you know, they're putting up different like collections that we can go through as a family and find the things that we want to watch this afternoon, this evening. And obviously, we're going to do that based on value to the customer. So, like, we think it's most important for the customer to free text search, and then they can do a browse by genre, and we'll focus on that functionality in that order. So we're sequencing the stories within that particular activity. So here's an example of that. You know, you've got your selection. We do our search, our free text search. We do our search by genre, popular, recent, Halloween, whatever. And then we have different examples across the, or different user stories, sorry, across the purchase, watch, and social aspects of the journey. So if you think about a team story mapping session, there's really the first piece, the way that I like to run this. And if I think about an example that I ran at Twitter, it was for an experiment. I won't call it a project, but it was for an experiment called One Factor Auth. And we started late one afternoon at about 3 o'clock one afternoon. We did personas, we fleshed out the activities, we fleshed out the user stories, and then we paused. And it was like, everyone's time, go home, we'll come back Tuesday morning. And then Tuesday morning was when we went on to the next section. And the next section was the sequencing, the estimation and the sequencing. The reason that we split it up overnight was to give people time to system to this stuff. So if you're familiar with the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, you've got like these system one things that are off, you know, these gut things that just kind of are off the cuff. We can put them up on the wall. And then if we have time to sleep on it, for instance, and come back the next day, we might come up with new ideas, new user stories, new activities, whatever it happens to be. So I tended to split it into two sections, a 2 hours, which was everything up to the personas, the activities, the stories, and then another 2 hours to actually come back the following day. Are there any other ideas that we had overnight? Are there any other activities that we thought of, user stories that have come up? And then we'd go through and we'd do the estimation exercise, and we'd actually order these things and sequence them. And so obviously, if you're thinking about a Kanban team, you might be sequencing them into versions of work, like what's our must release for our experiment to go live, what's our version 1.1 potentially look like, and so on and so forth. Or you might be doing this on a sprint by sprint basis. So this idea of sequencing, I think, is really valuable. You know, we're starting to help. It's like, obviously you can see that this is an activity that's not done just by the product manager in isolation anymore. But indeed, if you've got people from the product marketing crew involved, now they've got an idea of what will potentially be released and when, and why we're sequencing the delivery of this functionality in the way that we're delivering it. So again, going back to that shared understanding. A bit of a sidebar here. One of the things that we discovered early on in the life of Easy Agile user story maps for Jira was that people were taking it from a starting a project experience to kick off with a story mapping session, and they were using the story map as a way to, you know, track progress and keep stakeholders engaged, and indeed do that regular backlog grooming with the team on an ongoing basis. And our customers explained to us at the time, and this is going back to 2016 now, but they explained to us that it was just that visualization was a great way to share with the team, yes, but also the people beyond the team that they had to interact with, those other stakeholders. So who do we involve in this session? What does this actually look like? I would caveat this by saying, if you can, get an external facilitator. So to give you an example, going back to Twitter, we got into the habit in 2015 that when we were running story mapping sessions, if there was a product manager on the team, they'd do a request for a story mapping session, and they'd wave a flag, and one of the coaches would go in and facilitate the story mapping session so that they could be present and they could participate. If that's not available, then, you know, if you can't have an external or a product manager from another team facilitate, then typically it's the product manager of the team that facilitates. Ideally, you want to keep the numbers low, but I would really encourage you to get in the right stakeholders. So you're going to have the team members themselves. If you go much beyond 10, it gets really hard as a facilitator to make sure that everyone's engaged. And so I find it quite challenging. So a small group is easier to facilitate. And maybe you could, if you do have a larger group, maybe you break it down and you have different sessions, you know, with different members of the group. I was mentioning before the one-factor auth experiment and the story mapping session around that. In that story mapping session, which was a Monday afternoon and then a Tuesday morning from 10 to 12 or something like that. So it was about 4 hours over two different days. But we actually had 12, if not 13 people in that. And because we were touching on various aspects, like we were touching on the Android app. So we had the Android app representative in, we were touching on user authentication, we were touching on some network engineering. So we actually had stakeholders that we would have dependencies on outside of this immediate team. They came in and they joined the story mapping session so that they could sanity check some of the things that we were doing. But obviously, like, you just got to be mindful that, you know, you bring in too many people and it's not going to be effective. You have too few people and there might be external dependencies that you're not accounting for when you go into that sequencing of your work. So it's certainly something to keep in mind. And now that I think about it, I've never had a customer participate in a story mapping session. It's always, that's why the product manager is that proxy for the customer, because we don't want the customer, we don't want one particular customer typically to lead us down a garden path and take us to the solution that works for them at potentially the expense of a host of other customers. And so that's why, you know, it's ideal to have the product manager involved and not facilitating it if at all possible. So tips for running a story mapping session. You got to set aside, you got to set expectations up front, right? Like, this is not a regular sprint planning backlog grooming session where a team might come in, spend 45 minutes to an hour, do some estimation, split up stories, and then, yes, that looks like a good sprint to us, let's get started. You know, you want to set the expectation up front that this is a collaborative practice to go deep, understand the customer, figure out their problem, talk about it a lot, and you know, it might take time. So as I mentioned before, giving people time to system two things is really valuable. So one big long day might be all you can do if you're flying people in for an offsite, for a get together. So you got to, if you do that approach, you have to give the team the opportunity to come back at a later stage and provide subsequent feedback once they've returned home. I think where I'm at today is actually having chunks of time over a couple of days is better for giving people a chance to system two things. Typically these days you'll have the product manager present personas. You might have a data analyst come and present some data to support why this is a challenging thing. And so obviously you're trying to corral a whole lot of people, and there's a lot of content to get through. We did touch on this before with respect to the facilitation. One thing is super important, like, these are a huge distraction, right? So one of the things that was a standing rule at Twitter was you would do a phone stack. I can't really show you now, obviously, but basically you would do a phone stack and everyone would come into the room, and as soon as they arrived in the room, all the phones would go on the sideboard. And so it was not a temptation. I actually had one scenario where we had someone on call, and there was an active incident at Twitter, and there was someone in the room that was on call, and I had to ask them to leave because it was, of course, a huge distraction to the rest of the team that was trying to participate in the story mapping session. So just be mindful that you need everyone to be present and bringing their whole selves to this process, because you're using up people's time. So no distractions. So starting with personas, this whole idea of getting the personas up front is really important. I talked on, I shared this at the beginning with respect to Greenhopper and Jira Agile. We had those three personas. So we had the team member, the Scrum Master, and the product owner. And the story map would have been really muddled if we were trying to look at all three of them at once. And so we would like, let's pick one and let's talk about what the product owner is trying to do. Let's pick the Scrum Master and let's talk about what the Scrum Master is trying to do. The Scrum Master is more interested in the burn down report and the velocity chart. The product manager is more interested in epics and ordering and things like that. And so let's just focus on the activities that matter for each of those. I've actually used it to great effect to, like, get the personas out of people to get started, and then just put them to one side. So they're still there and we've talked about them, and you know that we've talked about them, but we're not talking about them right in this session. And anything that comes up, like any user stories or activities that come up, okay, that's great. That's for the Scrum Master. We're not talking about the Scrum Master right now, but I'll make a note of that. So as a facilitator, we'll make a note of that. It's over there for that other persona. And that allows people, if you don't give them the opportunity to get it off their chest, then they kind of get like stuck on that, and they get in a rut, and they're not focused on what is the current conversation. So you need to give people an opportunity to, even if it's not relevant to this conversation, like, download it or, like, you know, capture it and put it off to one side. And we'll get back to that when we do the story mapping session for that other persona. Is really valuable, actually. Now, don't think there's anything else to say about that. I'm not going to, suffice to say, we have easy agile user story maps for Jira. I'm not going to dive into a deep demo of this morning in the interest of time. As I mentioned before, Tegan Harbridge, our head of product, there is a deep demo that you can look at this if you're interested in learning more. But all of these apps that we have at Easy Agile, from Easy Agile personas, user story maps, roadmaps, and programs, they all came out of past experience at Atlassian and dealing with Atlassian's customers and learning from Atlassian's customers. They came out of experience at Twitter, and now here for the last 5 years out of the experience with the Easy Agile customers globally. And just to look at personas, for instance, it's a product that we released earlier this year because teams were capturing persona information in a host of different places. Just like teams were capturing story maps on a whiteboard that was no good for distributed team members. So we've just tried to take this at Easy Agile and make it more effective for distributed teams and capture the information in one place alongside a team's backlog in Jira software. So if we think about the results of running a story mapping session, you've arranged your features in sequential order. So you understand what features depend on one another. So you've got that dependency thing. We often find this actually where teams they don't understand that there's interdependencies until they get to that point. But because we've kind of sequenced things out and given a roughed out sprint plan in advance when we're doing the story mapping session, you've kind of got that implicitly. We arrange features by criticality. We're emphasizing the important activities or features at the top of the story map that customers are interested in. So we've gone from this onesie twosie kind of user story bug task into something that supports this much larger vision for our customers and this holistic vision that the team can get behind. Go back to Alex Henneke's comment with Atlassian, can't see the forest for the trees. Now you can actually see the forest and you can see the whole picture. And obviously, we've actually got a better idea of what's the functionality that we need to deliver to support each of these aspects on the activities, each of these steps in the process. So with that, I wanted to stop there. I wanted to thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Jasmine to call out any questions that we have from the audience.
Thanks, Nick. That was a great presentation. We've had some really interesting questions pop up throughout the discussion. So to kick off with the first one from Jean, who's asked, is there an easy way to identify a problem that is appropriate for the practice of user story mapping?
Oh, yeah, Jean. I'll give you, so let me collect my thoughts. I'm just thinking. So two different examples, and I'll go back to them that I've already talked about. If I think about Greenhopper or Jira Agile, we started out by doing an audit of all of the existing functionality in the product. And we wanted to understand how all of the existing functionality supported particular steps on the customer journey. And so we were coming at it from a different angle. And then we were looking at what are the gaps and what are the things that we want to jettison. We've got this story map, which is essentially a feature audit of what we had. And where do we take it from here for the next 10 years of the product? So that's one approach. The other approach that I shared with respect to one factor auth at Twitter was that this was, it was an experiment. We had this idea, a product manager had an idea, hey, there's an opportunity to get more people into the app easier, reduce the friction so there's more people tweeting, whatever else. And so you can start with experiments, things that you have a hypothesis around, and use that as a way to start with a story mapping journey and then go what are all of those steps? Any new product idea that you have, you can don't run off and do a whole lot of you don't have to run off and write code. You can literally get the team together that's done some customer interviews, put forward an idea about a particular new product or something like that, or a new solution, and then flesh out what it might look like. And then you can take that back to your customers and talk about, hey, if we delivered this at this point. So there's a number of different approaches you can take. I hope that helps, Jean.
Thanks, Nick. So Ralph's got a really great question, and you kind of alluded to it in your examples, but I'd like to add to his question as well. So the question is, how long would a usual or an initial user story mapping session go for? And is there a time frame that you'd recommend? And the part that I want to add in as well is, considering now that we're working remotely, most of us, how would that factor in how long an initial session might go for?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Ralph. When I started running story mapping sessions, I would take the better part of 4 hours in one 4-hour block. And that was at Atlassian. We might have even had some that ran longer than that I facilitated for other teams. But it was quite, as a facilitator, I found it quite mentally draining, like being on the whole time. And I think the team themselves found it draining. And so then you'd get into the world where you basically did like 2 hours before you did like a morning session and you came back after lunch. But that didn't really work well either. And so then at Twitter, I got in this habit of doing Monday afternoon, so they can get all the stuff off their plate Monday morning. They've had lunch. Monday afternoon, we go into the persona and the story mapping, the first part of the story mapping session. They sleep on it and we come back Tuesday. Now, with respect to COVID and distributed teams, I find that I can't do a phone stack, and I've got all of these other distractions on my laptop anyway. And being on the video conferencing for an extended period of time is really hard. And so I'd probably try and slice it up in that environment to like, let's do an hour on personas. Okay, now we've selected our one persona. Let's do an hour on activities. We've got some activities. Let's come back the next day and let's do an hour on stories. And I'd kind of chunk it up more, just because I'm concerned that people get fatigued on the video conferencing pretty quickly, especially given the year that we're having, I guess, and that people haven't necessarily been used to a lot of video conferencing. So yeah, I be conscious, and really as a facilitator, you need to read the mood. And if you're losing people, it's better to like call time out and come back to it than to persevere, because you're not going to get their focus and their deep thought.
Yeah, definitely. So we've had a couple of questions, and I'm going to pull together Trisha's question and Anthony's question, because they're all about the functionality of Easy Agile user story maps. So Trisha's asking around adding multiple story maps per project, and the fact that they've got various elements that need to be mapped to create the backbone. So they don't want to create a separate project for each element to be mapped. And I've mentioned to Trish there that in the next release of Easy Agile user story maps, you can actually filter by components and assignees. So components can be as versatile as your teams or your projects, and that allows your user story map to have the bandwidth to have the whole picture, but also for you to really focus that view. So Trish, please let me know if I didn't answer your question, and you have one on the back of that. But Anthony has also asked how Easy Agile and Jira handle themes which reside above epics. Now, that's very much on our horizon, but Nick, did you have any comment to that one?
Yeah, I think one of the approaches, or one of the decisions that we made very early on in the life of Easy Agile user story maps for Jira was around leveraging the Jira primitives. And the closest Jira primitive to that additional level was the component. Aside from that, I can create something new, but it's not consistent across the thousands of different instances of Jira that our customers have out there today. Whereas component is there for every project. Of course, there's limitations to that. So to go back to your comment, Jasmine, for Trisha, components aren't cross-project. And we are looking at a solution for that. But historically, what our customers have done is they have one project for this particular product or solution, and then they will split it out by potentially like component teams, and they'll use the component field they could use component field for those themes as well as teams. If you look at, like if I think about our approach at Twitter, every team had their own project, but that is not obviously appropriate for every company. So suffice to say, it's an area that we're under active investigation for 2021, and it would be great if you could flag your details with Jasmine, and she can put you in touch with Elizabeth and Tegan, so that we can learn some more about your particular use case.
Most definitely. Okay, so Israel, and just, I guess this is a question for everyone. We will be providing the recording and we will be sending along the slides, so you can share that with your team members who may have missed out. I will take this opportunity to ask you, if you have any final questions for Nick, now is the moment. Please pop them in the chat in the questions poll. But otherwise, we will be following up with an email, and we really appreciate you joining us this morning and hope that you got a lot out of it. So if there aren't any further questions, also, I have put links, and Sean has put some useful links for you in the chat box. So the live demo that Nick mentioned, there is a link to that there, so you can click through to that. Also to the Easy Agile user story maps and Easy Agile personas marketplace listings, where you can try the products for free as well. And Sean has also mentioned our email is at hello@easyagile.com, and one of us will always get back to you. So please say hello, let us know your thoughts. We'll definitely follow up if you do reach out to us. Thank you all for attending. I think that's about it. Thanks very much,
folks.
everybody. We'll catch you soon.
Ciao.